Hi, everybody. Welcome to Forbes Newsroom. I'm Diane Brady, Assistant Managing Editor here at Forbes, and I am with Dick Patton, who is the Global Head of the CEO practice at Egon Zehnder. Dick, nice to have you here.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Diane.
So we're talking about CEO succession, the path to the C-suite. We just did our CEO Next list, and I know that Egon Zehnder was a very important part of that. Tell me a little bit about how the world has changed.
Well, firstly, I think it was a great list. I genuinely mean that. It was curated using a lot of experts. My firm, some of the firms who do similar work to us included, and I think you were given great insights and great ideas. It was a fresh list.
Thank you.
With respect to your question, though, what has changed is everything. The last 3 years have it's hard to even put your finger on what specifically has changed. I guess I've spent a decent amount of time doing work in China, and there's a phrase that businesses in China use called China speed. And it feels like China speed has come to global business in a typically fast way. There's things are whether you're talking about business performance, which has gone for many companies up and then down just as quickly as it's gone up. For other companies, it's been more consistently bad or good. Social issues, retention and hiring issues, climate issues. Boards are being shaken up. The C-suite is being shaken up. Our industry, and I know I can represent many of my peer firms who do similar work to us, we've never seen growth, particularly in the US, like we've seen it over the last year and a half.
And that's when you talk about growth, you talking about the demand basically for new people in these seats? Is it really because turnover itself, certainly during the pandemic, actually reduced? So where are you seeing that growth?
Well, turnover in the C-suite reduced, but general turnover
Right.
has increased. So I think there are two factors that generally affect our industry, and in some cases it affects our industry more than it does my firm in particular. And gets into how we work with our clients. But in general, there are two factors. One is the rate of turnover, and the other is compensation. And turnover is increasing, and so is compensation on a per job basis, especially at the senior most levels. So that's what's driving a lot of the increase in growth for the industry in general. In the CEO office, you're right. It did plateau for a while. I think the reasons for that have become pretty obvious. Boards were afraid to make decisions, and frankly, a lot of CEOs felt a loyalty to their company, to their people, to their customers, to their patients, in some cases, to want to see it through. In some ways, we now know that there's no seeing it through. And instead, everyone's just tired. So it's sort of reached a point of predictable unpredictability, such that CEOs, you now are seeing an increase in the rate of turnover in the CEO office.
So one of the things that struck me as interesting during the reporting process was understanding how the role of the CEOs changed. Let's take stakeholder capitalism, which is a term that can feel like marketing at times, but it's having a real impact, isn't it, on the type of person that you want in that role? Talk a little bit about that.
It actually is. Although I would say it's less marketing than some companies feel that ESG is. Um, it's the shift from shareholder primacy to stakeholder primacy or stakeholder capitalism, depending on the phrase you prefer. Um, has I think some companies have resisted that shift, but almost no CEOs have. And the difference there is oftentimes boards are slightly behind their CEOs in recognizing the need to accommodate or to engage with a wide array of stakeholders. And CEOs are in the job. They feel it every day. They feel it from their employees. They feel it from their investors. They feel it from uh, um, regulators. They feel it from the communities in which they operate. They can't hide. Not that they're trying to hide, but they know they can't hide.
Well, plus the board is really a surrogate for the investor, is it not typically? I mean, they're there to really represent the owners of the company. So it makes it interesting that boards are the ones making the choices as to who the new CEOs are. Do you feel like they are not ahead of the curve, but do you think they fully understand how the nature of the job has changed?
I think they are learning. And one of the areas in which it has been hard for boards to see the job as it is today, not impossible, and I'm certainly not talking about every board or every director, but many directors were operators of businesses during a different time. And and that can mean somebody who retired 3 years ago was operating a business or in a business at a different time than what it is today to be an operator in that same business. So I think yes, there's the governance aspect, the governance dimension of a board's role, but but we can't underestimate the personal aspect of a director's role and the frames of references that they bring to that directorship, based on what they knew and how they operated when they were operating. Not all directors are retired. Obviously, there's tons of directors who are not retired, but most directors are retired because of the limitations, which are there in place for good reason, in my view, on how many boards on which you can serve while you're an active executive.
So when you look at, let's take the CEO role. There's always been a very sort of traditional route. You know, you get a, P&L. You run a business unit. I know CFO has been a popular jumping off point. One of the things that's interesting is seeing the many different routes that to the top. Also, the number of people who can skip industries. Give me some sense as to really people who may be watching this who are interested in that job. What advice do you have in terms of the career path since it's not quite as classic as it was 10, 20 years ago?
Well, if you're a gambler, I would I would seek a wide portfolio of functional experience because
Every C-suite role that's thrown at you, take it.
right. I'm mostly teasing when I say that. But I would say that experience is table stakes. Um, having roles that are as much a proxy for the CEO role as you can have is a good idea. Now, what you consider I guess what I would say is then I would think about, so what is the CEO role? And by the way, could it be different from the way my CEO does it today? Um, and we can get back to that when we talk about the sort of motivation level for the role. But I think an array of functional and geographic experience is a huge help in getting somebody ready to become a CEO. It increases your confidence. You see a company through more lenses. I also think that seeking directorship as a non-executive director on a board, obviously not your own board, is another perspective that you can give yourself to enhance your executive skill set. So I think experientially, the more diverse, the merrier. Having said that, that those paths are paths to becoming a CEO, but they're not necessarily paths to becoming a successful CEO. And in our industry, years ago, we used to say um, the appointment is the end point, but now we say the appointment is the midpoint because it is an ecosystem that gets a CEO from not being a CEO to being a CEO, or from being a CEO of one company to the CEO of another, and seeing it through their lens is the day of the appointment is day one for them. And our firm and other firms and boards, it's really critical for us to not just leave them hanging at that moment of appointment.
So that transitional period into office. I mean, when you talk about success, I've been intrigued by seeing this increase in the number of internal promotions. Almost like boards feel like they failed somehow if they go outside the company. You know, that traditionally, if I recall correctly, they have a better batting average than people who are external hires, those internal hires. Is that still the case? And when you think about succeeding in the role, how much of it's contingent on being from the company, from the culture, giving you an edge, or is that no longer the case?
That is a really complicated question with
Probably 7 questions in one.
yeah, with a complicated answer. I'll do my best. I think that gauging success today is usually done with old metrics. So I almost can't, I don't know that anyone can answer the question, are internals more successful than externals? One has to be more precise about how they're defining success. If you're talking about increasing the value of the company, or executing or envisioning a strategy, et cetera, it then becomes sort of like too parsed out to really answer the question. But that's kind of the point, is that the ways of measuring CEO success are in flux right now, just like the job is in flux right now. So, we'll never know if a big manufacturing company who, did great at increasing the value of the company, but in the meantime was polluting, outrageously, and didn't meet currently undervalued climate metrics. That it becomes that's why I say it's a complex question. So I don't really know how to answer that part of your question. However, the part of your question that was about, like, are you advantaged if you come from inside the company? I'd say generally the answer to that is yes. However, it also depends. In a major transformation, for an executive to move from C-level position X to the CEO suite, they have to contend with the legacy that they're leaving behind in creating a situation that needs to be transformed. So it's a very as we say, it's horses for courses. Every situation is really quite different.
So let me stick with the internal a bit, which is the mindset that you have to succeed in the job, to even get the job in the first place. Let me start with that, because it does pivot to a question about diversity. But first of all, to want the job, but when you look and you do these 360s, what kind of mindset are you looking for that you think that's a person who's going to be able to handle the nature of the job they're going into?
So that's a great question. First, we look at potential. And we have a proprietary way of looking at potential, where there are 4 dimensions, and we can score based on our interpretation of one's potential, but also relative to our database, which, as you know, we're a large global firm, and we do assessments. We do thousands of assessments every year. We also look at their capacities for, as I mentioned earlier, self-awareness, relatability, and adaptability. When you really add all of this up, we're looking for somebody who knows him or herself well, who's had enough of the sort of suitable experience. Doesn't have to be tons of it, but enough of the executive experience one needs to be able to understand a little bit more about what the job is. And we also look for stamina. It's an exhausting job.
How do you measure stamina? Ironman competitions.
Yeah, well, that's a good way to measure it. It's through getting to know the person and to understand how exhausted they are to have gotten to where they are. I'm working on a succession right now where, gosh, the candidate is phenomenal. The finalist candidate is phenomenal. It is internal. He knows the company well. The company is super successful, but he is really, really tired. And we're trying to gauge, with his input, how he can reset and re-energize and position himself for success in the role. And in some cases, that's somatic work. In some cases, it's therapeutic work. Quite honestly, which I'm not qualified for. Neither is our firm, but we can make recommendations. In some cases, it's sleep. In some cases, it's sort of identifying where that individual gets energy. Could be from spending much more time with their family than they have been able to. Could be from traveling for 2 or 3 months because they've been, essentially in lockdown because of COVID. But trying to help them figure out a game plan for re-energizing so that they have the right level of energy for the role.
I want to key off one thing you said about relatability, Dick, 'cause it gets to, we had a very diverse list. It's not as diverse as what you see when you look at the whole ecosystem of, say, S&P 500 CEOs. We do still, the progress is very slow when you're looking at, black CEOs, women CEOs. There's been certainly some changes and gains, but is there any reason that you see as to why the progress is slow? Because the desire is there to have a more diverse C-suite, to have a more diverse, cohort of CEOs in America. It seems to be slower than a lot of people would like.
Yeah, I think it's an emphasis on experience.
So pipeline issue.
Exactly, that goes upstream more quickly than a sort of readiness of different sorts. And experience is a really, really defendable criterion to base a decision on. And I do think that that's part of the, sort of risk mitigatory mindset of those who are making those decisions. So I would say it's not a very optimistic response to the question. We at our firm, and I think so many companies, so many boards, so many firms who do what we do are all in favor of diversification, but this pipeline that's related to an experience focus. Not to say that there aren't great people in the pipeline, but it takes sort of generations for a wider array of them to be on the bench with the experience that boards want executives to have, which is essentially sort of mini CEOs to then get into the chair. There are a lot of examples of skip level CEOs.
Where you basically jump over and go straight from running a unit to running the company?
Yep, exactly. You may not be in, the C-suite at the time. There are some good examples of that. I think it's going to take work, and it's going to take more than enthusiasm. It's going to take, sort of boldness and courage and work, and it's going to take executives who are willing to take that leap as well.
Is there anything else, since you do this study every year, you're out there, I know you've got a string of client engagements this week. Any insights into what's around the corner, especially if you're talking directly to those who are looking to hire, if they're founders that are looking to scale up and they're looking for any thoughts as to sort of what to think about in terms of where the world is going and the kind of leadership that really is going to take us there that maybe we haven't focused enough on?
Yes, I would say two things. One is tactical, one is more psychological. The tactical one is, even if you feel you have a great internal candidate as a CEO successor, in some way, shape, or form, look outside as well, because it'll make you more confident about your choice. It may introduce new options to you, but at the very least, it can serve as making you more confident about your choice. And for the candidate who ends up in the role, it gives them the confidence that it wasn't just sort of, you're the last.
Heir apparent, right?
Yeah, exactly. The more psychological one, and I am seeing this just in the last year, is to just be open. Be open with your advisors, be open with your other directors to brainstorm, to consider a wider set of possibilities. And I guess a third one, which is also tactical, is plan in advance. Don't allow yourself to be in a situation where you're surprised. And if you are surprised, have a plan for that. Have a plan for the near term, the medium term, and the longer term. And great CEO candidates can come from any number of areas. They can come from within your company, either the C-suite or a level or two down. They can come from your board. We're seeing some, I don't know if there's an increase, but some high profile examples of that. They can come from CEOs. They can come from being CEOs of other companies. They can come from, the sort of typical external places. But if you're not in the flow of talking about that with your board, and if you're not in the flow of at least keeping your eyes on that, um, it's going to make it much scarier and more panicky to go through a process that's emergent or even medium term. If you don't have a vocabulary with your board, the muscles of working on this constantly. I often tell boards who I work with, you have an audit partner who is routinely helping you with your company's financials. I strongly recommend to boards, whether it's us or another firm, that they, even if they don't hire a firm like ours for that regular conversation, to just insist on it themselves and not in a cursory way either.
Great. Dick Patton, Egon Zehnder, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Diane.